Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be tuning in from. I've got to go check it again, Jason, but this is episode 163.
163 weeks hanging out and talking about what matters in data protection. That is insane, my friend. And
It
how are
is,
you on this brisk
I,
January morning?
I am doing good. Thankfully, both of us survived Las Vegas, and some of our colleagues survived going in Dublin. Not everyone did. Some people came back not feeling great. I feel absolutely wonderful, which of course probably jinxes it. But
Good job.
this is actually one of my favorite times of year, besides the fact that a new year, new beginnings, it's always kind of fun. This is the type of year where we come out with our flagship research, really the research that points to and fuels the other projects that we double click on. Let's use this as the first of a six-part series where we're going to dive into some brand new research. But Jason, before we do, want to encourage everyone, speaking of different locations such as Vegas and Dublin, wherever you might be tuning in from, please give us a shout out on the platform you're viewing us on. We've got a team that's monitoring that. We're going to refer to a world map from time to time to see where people might be tuning in live from. And of course, as always, if you have any questions, comments, you want to join the conversation, feel free to jump in on the comments there as well. But Jason, if people aren't familiar with this flagship research, let's just start right from the beginning.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and bring up the first slide to kind of let folks see where the data comes from. So Dave and I are both in the midst of celebrating our 6-year anniversaries here at Veeam. I came in January. Dave, are you a May birthday or a March birthday? I forget.
I'm May, which I like because it's May 9th or five nines of reliability if you're an infrastructure
Nice.
geek.
All right, all right. So Dave and I have both been here about 6 years ish, and so for the last 5 years, we've had the chance to act with the marketing and analytics and operations teams to bring this to you. So that means this is the fifth year that two former analysts have had the opportunity to work on our own banner in this data protection trends report. Now, what you're looking on the left-hand side on the green lines, this is what we think of as a macro industry report. So think of it like the tips of many icebergs. There's a lot of stuff underneath the water, and in fact, cyber was so interesting. We do our own report on cyber, comes out every spring around the Veeam time frame. Cloud was so interesting. We've done several years of that research as well. But this is kind of that macro report on what's driving change in data protection. In the last couple of years, we've had this data up through 4,200 responses in some years when we wanted to get really precise on different segment sizes and different industries and verticals and geos. This year's report, still one of the largest that I've put my fingerprints on, and even during my analyst days, 1,200 unbiased IT leaders and implementers. So we use third-party research houses. They go out to their panels. They vet them to make sure they are actually from enterprise organizations, so 1,000 users or more. In fact, on the chart on the right, you can see a lot more sometimes. And from at least 10 different countries around the world this time around, including both EMEA, APJ, and the Americas, North and South. And so they had to be the IT implementer or the IT leader responsible for data protection for those enterprises. And so what we're going to spend the next several weeks on is kind of double clicking into what did these 1,200 folks say about what's driving their challenges, their strategies moving forward, some of their technical choices. Always one of my favorite series, always fun to kick off the year with, Dave.
Yeah, and I just can't help but double down, the fact that this is independent, it's not a Veeam commercial. Like Jason said, no one knew Veeam was asking these questions. The intent isn't to try to bias this in any way. We use it internally within Veeam to better understand and listen to what the market trends are, where the pain points are, where the interests are, to have better conversations with product management, what we're developing, to figure out the best alliance partners to focus on, and the list goes on and on. But Jason, I know you've heard me say this phrase before, but I think it still holds true. You owe it to yourself to download this report to get informed. Again, the notion that it's not a Veeam commercial, it's really trying to put our finger on the pulse of what's going on currently in the industry. And by virtue of having done this now for so many years in a row, we can get some great year over year trends. Some of those trend lines have something like 13,000 data points
Yeah.
associated with them. So there's some pretty good telemetry. I mean, for 3 years in a row, I think it was Jason, we went as big as we could, going all the way up to 4,200 respondents. You don't actually have to have 4,000 plus respondents to have a statistically valid understanding of what's going on. But we really wanted to double click and prove to ourselves, how does SMB, midsize enterprise, compare to large enterprise? How do certain geographies, in one case, up to 28 countries, in this case, looking at just into double digit countries, are the variances great or not? Turns out, short story, the variances are not nearly as great as people think. But the
Yeah.
ability to do this year over year is fun because we can help understand and re-anchor ourselves what's really going on.
Yeah, last year we went off and we added another 800 SMB to kind of look at some of the differences. You bring up a great point between you don't need that large data set. What we did though is we did add several hundred SMBs across EMEA, several hundred SMBs across the Americas, and then a couple hundred across APJ. And what we found between the qualitative and the quantitative was that in some cases the rationale as to why a small business might do something is different than obviously a large enterprise. And yet statistically, there wasn't a whole lot of variance on what the end result was. So, as an example, when we look at things like disaster recovery as a service, right? So a small business doesn't have a secondary data center, right? So they're going to use cloud. A large enterprise doesn't want a secondary data center, so they're going to use cloud, right? So the rationale and why they might be doing something certainly is contextual, based on geo, based on size, based on industry, and yet the statistics didn't normalize out to be that much different, more than 2, 3, 5 points on some of these questions. So with that in mind, this year we kind of scaled back a little bit. We got it down to 1,200, which is still larger than the average research project. Dave, when I was with the last analyst firm that I was with prior to joining Veeam, the average sample set that we used was 300, sometimes down to 200, 150 even, depending on the location and the topic set. 1,200 is a very generous end. What about you in your last life? What kind of ends did you get to deal with?
Yeah, I had the luxury of, once I became conference chair, co-conference chair for the second largest conference at Gartner, I was able to kind of sneak in a few things, including a special research panel with a whole bank of laptops, and encourage people as they walked in the show
Oh
area
yeah.
to fill out some information. That only lasted a few years, but in general, it was the same kind of thing. When we had audience polling, we could get up to maybe 300, 350, and a lot of times maybe a little smaller than that. That's not even done anymore. I was at that same conference in December in Vegas, and there isn't polling done anymore. So, long-winded way of saying, this information generally does not exist elsewhere.
Yeah.
It certainly doesn't exist at this scale or this level of history. And, that's in part why we keep after it, because we really want to see, what do the trend lines do? It's one thing to think about what you heard recently in a couple customer meetings or some resellers that have talked to a group of customers, but it's another thing to prove it to yourself and to do so on a regular basis. So
Hey, let me add
without,
one more thing before we
yeah,
add to the map, and that is, we've talked about how this data is meant for where we define what our next features should be. We've talked about how it helps certainly tell the better story. But for all the folks that are listening, I just want to encourage you. We also hope that you use this data to start new conversations with your
yes.
peers. Right? It is unbiased industry data that reflects the same kind of folks that are probably on watching these live streams week after week. So we hope that you use this data to create new conversations with your boss, with your teams, with your security-minded cohorts. Use that, and in fact, we'll provide an email address at the end if you have questions on where to get more information. You can do that from there. But Dave, sorry, I was cutting you off. I bet we're going towards the map.
Yeah, we are. But that's a great cut in because it's a good reminder. Again, that's why we say download the information, check out the report. We even give away the slides
Yeah.
that are freely available for use by partners, anyone. And, again, with the whole idea of take this information, try to, especially as we begin a new year, now we're in January, maybe towards the end of the month, but still for most of us, early on in the year, and you've got the opportunity to possibly affect your 2024 plans. So utilize that information in that way. So without further ado, I see we've got a pretty big list as I look over at the team. Let's check out the map. So always beauty, Jason, when we get some of these larger countries or
There you go.
geographically dispersed countries like a Canada or Brazil. But if we just start up in the Americas, we see we've got the states in the U.S. of California, Massachusetts, Florida. We also have Canada, Costa Rica. I
Love when
skipped a
Canada
couple
turns
states
on.
there
Woof.
because they came in very, very early of Texas, Colorado,
Whoop.
Georgia, Ohio. If we look across the way a little bit, in Europe, what we see is Portugal, Spain, United Kingdom, Sweden, Germany, Romania, Kosovo. And then in South America, we've got, of course, Brazil, I mentioned, but also Venezuela. And in Africa, we've got Kenya, I'm sorry, I was conflating some words there, countries, Kenya and Namibia and Tunisia, as well as our friends in APAC of India and Indonesia, more coming in. So keep chatting away there where you might be tuning in from. And of course, if you have comments or suggestions, again, I can't overemphasize for the production team that's been with us from the beginning, Jason, myself, now we're literally going on 4 years at the end of March that we've been doing this. It started off as just something fun on World Backup Day, March 31st, 2020, just as we were entering the throes of a global pandemic. And here we are all this time later. So
Yeah.
we've teased it long enough, Jason. Let's hit a data point and riff on that.
Yeah, so if you're going to start to have a conversation with your peers on how data protection is changing, this is probably a pretty good one to light up with. So, let's call it one of the money questions. What is the likelihood that your organization will switch its primary backup solution over the next 12 months? Now, when I read into this a little bit, I think about two things. One, there's certainly changed the vendor of your backup solution, right? From an IBM or a Dell or a Veritas to Veeam would be a nice example, please. But other than that, the other thing is I think a lot of folks are certainly we're seeing a lot of interest and shift towards backup as a service. So going from, hey, I've run my own backup solution for the last couple of years, but now I want the smart kids on the other side of the phone to manage that for me. So switching from a solution to a service, even if the tech underlying stays consistent, I would still consider a yes. But here's the fun part: 54%. Right, Dave, you and I have talked about this myth in years past that, once people pick a backup solution, it's kind of like a political party or religion. They tend just to stay with it until they expire. And that's actually, it was never true in
Yep.
backup. And certainly this year is no different. I do think it's interesting. 1 in 4 don't anticipate changing, 1 in 5 can't decide, but more than half intend to change. Now, Dave, when we talk about this in the past, you have a good analogy here on, it doesn't mean everyone will, but there's interest. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I view it as sort of this like a heat gauge. The fact that people are saying that they're willing to go and explore something meaning a change that they're not predisposed to wanting to do. It's a big activity. It's not an
Sure.
undertaking for the light. And there's also, contractual, financial, multi-year contracts that could be in place, training, you name it. So the fact, though, that just over half are indicating that they've got a pretty strong interest in making a switch is very telling that there's certainly some level of dissatisfaction, some level of need not being met. To your point, it was always a myth that nobody changed backup vendors. We know that this is true because of share shift that we've
Sure.
seen. Without naming names, the longtime number one in market is now globally number three in market, as but one example. To put a Veeam commercial on it, I remember when Veeam was number 10 in market. Now tied for number one in marketplace globally. So shift has always been happening, but it was always a belief that it was not. That 19%, or as you point out, 1 in 5. That 1 in 5 could go both ways, right?
Sure.
I mean, they could remain undecided and they could, not switch, or they could remain undecided initially and then move towards the counterclockwise area and actually decide to make a change. So that 54% or better than half could trend upwards to be closer to 3 out of 5 if we get it up there.
Three
So
out of
it's
four, even,
very,
right? Yeah.
yeah, very, very interesting, very telling. The other thing that I think is interesting is if we follow the money line on the left-hand side.
Yeah, so one quick thought on the money thing, or on the interest thing. Think about it this way. As of January 2024, 54%, let's take backup out of it for a second. 54% of folks are intend to change the car they currently drive this year. That means now not everyone's going to buy, but 54% are going to go into a car dealership this year and look around, right? And that's really what this data is saying. And oh, by the way, another 19%, if I'm going to go and look at a new car this year or not. But there's 11 months left in this year, and my guess is over half of them probably go that direction. That's going to get you into that 2/3 range for market shift. Now, the main reason that you don't go into a car dealership is probably because you don't think you can afford it, which is going to give us our numbers on the left-hand side. So organizations were asked, separate question, is your data protection budget going to grow, and if so, by how much? In 2024. And so 92% of organizations said they will have incremental budget for data protection year over year, what they spent in 2023. And on average, the industry overall is going to have a 6.6% increase. Now, 6.6% increase in data protection budget doesn't sound like a lot until you look at what the overall IT spend expected budget increases for 2024. Dave, you watch the Gartner and IDC slides closer than I do. How does this compare to overall industry spend?
Yeah, dramatically higher. But again, we're dealing with the law of small numbers here. So to your point, 6.6, you say that's not that much. But overall, both major analyst houses are forecasting about a 4% increase in overall data center spend. So 4% versus 6.6, that's literally over 50% more spend allocated in the data protection space, in backup and recovery, as compared to on average all of the other areas. And so a little myth busting here too, Jason, because we've been hearing for the last few years how budget in the security realm has certainly freed up a lot getting funneled there. We've also heard much more recently about AI projects causing people to revisit budgets, reallocate. But despite that, and of course, there is a role to play in security with backup and recovery. But despite these other sort of trends and overall shifts that are taking place, much higher than average spend, and the fact that better than 9 out of 10 say that they're going to experience an increase, that's, I don't want to say unprecedented, because last year we saw this bump up as well, but it's probably surprising to many out there.
Yeah, and I think the way you could look at it is, certainly when you live in the real IT world, what you're going to see is, okay, so overall budgets are going to go up 3 to 4%. That's what I see in Gartner tell us. It's not often that they don't sometimes do an uplift on that mid-year through as they see how spending is actually going. But that said, within an IT organization, there are some have-tos. Right. So cyber prevention is a have to, data protection is a have to. We see those year over year continue to go up disproportionately higher than overall budget. I think you're probably going to see some more investments around AI because we're in the hype curve right now. So that's going to get some incremental budget, nowhere to go but zero, up from zero. So that's good. That does mean there's probably some other areas of IT that will go down. Right. So even though overall budgets are going up, there's going to have to be some give from some of those other areas and categories of IT in order for the take that's happening in data protection, in cyber, in AI. So, but bottom line for the kids at home is over half of organizations intend to look at new backup solutions. And oh, by the way, the vast majority of organizations have the budget to carry that forward. I would also poke on, 6.6 doesn't sound like a lot. If your personal budget went up by 6%, like in case my boss is watching, 6% increase year over year, I would not think of that as trivial. Totally good with that. Just, saying anyway, in case he's listening. So, all right. That's our first data point. Do we want to go back to the map, or do we want to look at the rest of where this shift is happening?
Yeah, let's hit the next data point here. And I think this one's really interesting too. So what we've just established is a little myth busting, the fact that people are far more interested in change, and the fact that they probably on average have the budget to go and enact that change. Now let's start to dissect a little bit about, what's behind that.
Yeah, this one could get exciting, depending on which side of this chart
Yes.
that you're on. So one of the new questions that was asked in the research this year is to the respondent themselves. So remember, these are all the folks who are responsible for data protection within their organizations, right? So with that as the idea, those 1,200 folks were asked how likely was it they personally would seek a new job outside their current org over that same upcoming 12-month period. And interestingly enough, 47%, nearly half, intend to change jobs. Now, again, kind of like that last one, maybe they're not going to actually change jobs, put in their 2 weeks notice, whatever that happens to be. But 47% are going to update their LinkedIn profiles. 47% are going to take that phone call when if it happens, or maybe start one if they want. There is an intent to change, as opposed to only a third of folks are committed to staying where they're at. And then again, interestingly, by coincidence, 19% are undecided overall. This much shift creates a caution and an opportunity for the market. Dave, I don't remember this stat being near as high in sentiments from outsiders before. Although I will point out, LinkedIn actually did a report like 2 weeks ago, right before the DPR report broke, and they actually profiled the same question: how likely are you to change? And I got to give props, because they broke it down by job vertical, and the IT staff percentage likely to change jobs was 47%.
Oh,
Love it
interesting.
when data matches data. So,
Yeah, that is fascinating. And, it, like you say, good news, bad news potential here.
yeah.
Pretty shocking that 1 out of 2 admins could be doing something different, maybe at the same company, or maybe doing the same thing but at a different company. Regardless, it means if we combine these two stats, the previous one and this, you might be changing your backup solution, and you might have a different crew that's actually involved in implementing and managing that while trying to manage the transition as well. So I'll ask, potentially, in other words, the fact that if we look at the green here on this one, the fact that only 1 out of 3 are firmly embedded of, yeah, I'm going to be in this same role. I think I'm going to end 2024 as I began at doing this. Pretty telling. That's a lot of shift, a lot of change
Yeah.
going on in an environment where we already have quite a bit happening. As we're going to see as we start to get further into our 6-part series, especially around cyber, especially around different opportunity costs associated with data center initiatives, something to keep an eye on, Jason, because that's adding arguably risk as well as opportunity into the overall availability equation here, isn't it?
Oh yeah. So let's talk about your worst day, right? The day that Bitcoin is ransomed, the day that the data center hits on fire or is underwater, right? So we know from past years' experience that way too many organizations, the vast majority, in fact, assume that when on the company's worst day, your IT team and your executives are going to rally together,
Yes.
and they will muster what they need to, and they will get going again, right? So here's the problem: what if the smartest person in the room is no longer in the room, right? Because in 47% of cases, the smartest kid in the room is looking at going someplace else, right? So now you are in your worst day, right? You've had a ransomware attack, you've had a breach, the data center's underwater. Pick your favorite worst day, right? And the smartest person in the room left 3 weeks ago. Where are you going to find those ISOs? Where are you going to find those patches? Where are you going to find all that institutional knowledge? Because they're gone. right? And so there's a huge risk profile that increases, not just because of the exposure of cyber and all the other things that go wrong, but what happens if the smart kid is not there anymore? In fact, I will tell you, we go through this exercise. I used to do a lot of DR planning for folks, and certainly cyber does this a lot now. When you think about tabletop exercises and you're thinking about modeling that worst day, it's not uncommon that the smartest kid in the room, you literally at the beginning of the exercise say, oh, family emergency, death in the family, on a plane, whatever, they're not available. Smartest kid in the room leaves the room. And then you just watch the rest of the team just implode, right? And that's what the danger is for 47% of these organizations. I will flip it over, be the optimist for a minute. That does mean if you don't have enough smart kids in your room, right? If you don't have enough bench on how to protect against cyber, how to protect IaaS and SaaS, how to spell Kubernetes, right? If you don't have those people, 47% of the smart kids are likely to be open to work on their LinkedIn profiles this year. And that means there's good talent to hire along the way. So that's the good and the bad, Dave. What are you thinking on this?
Yeah, I think there could be a causality between these two data points, meaning in part an organization might be thinking there's going to be a change in backup solution because the current administrative crew that has training and affinity towards one solution set or the couple of solutions that they may be using, all that could shift. It could be, as you pointed out, it could be even same vendor, but going to an as a service deployment model or a managed service of some kind, or just outright switching the software and potentially infrastructure that they're operating in-house. So a little tease for what's to come in the weeks ahead. A lot of what we're going to unearth in all these upcoming data points are what's behind this, what's causing this level of interest in doing something different, either personally or from an availability perspective in your protection software, your protection scheme. Do want to hit the map one more time before we kind of tease ahead what else is coming along, because we do have some other areas that have come in. In the United States, we've got Michigan that's also joined us. And one of the things that I think is fascinating, Cuba, Jason, I believe might be a first for us on nearly 4 years. We always get excited when we see actually anybody, and of course the big countries, but when we see a brand new country, fascinating and welcome. We see France, Slovakia, and Turkey that have also come in since we last took a look at the map. And we also see Pakistan that's come along as well. Shout out to our compadre, Rick Vanover, who's tuning in. Rick is getting over a little bit of an illness, so hope he's doing well. Hope everyone's doing well out there. I know it's winter for many of us in certain geographies, so make sure you're taking care of yourself. Jason, as we look ahead, I mentioned a few times, this is first in a 6-part series. Let's go ahead and tee up how people can get this information and then talk about what's to come.
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and put the URL to download the full report in there. One of the things just as a tease, right? So we just talked about all the folks that are going to be leaving their organizations, but there was a follow-up question that's in the report that talks about what were their top reasons why. So if you were identifying in one of those categories of you're going to change jobs or not, you might want to see if your reasons line up with the reasons that are in the report. You can download the report either on the URL or by hitting that QR code in the on the right-hand side of the screen. Also, it's worth pointing out, so if you have questions about how the research was gathered and some of the deeper insights and stuff, you can reach Dave and I year-round at strategicresearch@veeam.com. We'd love to entertain your questions along the way. Otherwise, throw them into the chats and we'll try to get to them as quickly as we can off thread. But yeah, Dave, this is it's going to be a fun series. There are some new questions in DPR we haven't seen before, and then some other questions we've asked for 5 years in a row. And some of the trajectories are as interesting as the data points themselves.
Yeah, very, very well said. So the next 5 episodes or next 5 Tuesdays coming up are going to be to double click on the remaining research. Even, Jason, at 6 weeks, we're not covering all of the data points. We're picking our favorite highlights. So more to unpack in the report. Also, you can download slides that you can use internally, have conversations with. But in the next 5 weeks, we're going to double click a little further and answer some of the questions about what's going on, why this level of change. Do want to give a shout out, mentioned Rick earlier, our colleague Rick Vanover. On our Thursday Tech Bites, this Thursday, we're going to have Wasabi and Rick and Veeam get together, talk about immutable storage, talk about what's going on with ultra resilient storage types. Sadly, Jason, you really can't have much of a conversation without cyber entering in some way, some shape or form. So encourage everyone to check that out. And also be sure to check out the report. Be sure to join us next week. And until then, stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you on the next live stream. Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
In a world of increasing cyber threats and smarter cyber criminals, be radically resilient. Introducing Veeam Data Platform 23H2 Update, built on Zero Trust architecture and with AI-powered threat detection, proactive threat hunting, SIM systems and ServiceNow integration, and Yara content analysis. Plus, Veeam's new Threat Center helps identify risks to your environment in a simple, powerful security scorecard. The Veeam Data Platform includes backup and recovery, monitoring and analytics, plus recovery orchestration. Learn more at vee.am/what's new and achieve radical resilience.